Ladies and gentlemen, members of the jury, members of the Roll the Tape film crew. For several months now, we've been watching and hearing through social media, in interviews, and even a face-off, one-on-one, face-to-face, face-off. You know how professional boxers would do face-offs, sit at a table with a mediator or a host that asks both fighters questions while they're sitting face to face. Well, that's what Oscar De La Hoya and Eddie Hearn has done. They've been going through a beef for months and just basically going back and forth. And Oscar De La Hoya basically came out and talked about how multiple fighters that Eddie Hearn promote through his company Matchroom has lost. Basically, mostly all of them lost in their fights that they've been fighting on DAZN on. And of course, most of those fights were through Matchroom promotion, and even a few of them were through Turkey. You know, Turkey, Al Sheikh has been cutting the check, obviously, to most of the promoters in America, but even Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren over there in the UK. But most recently, Oscar De La Hoya said something probably about a month ago, and I was intrigued when I heard it. He said that Eddie Hearn can't build fighters up. He gave the reference about the career of Anthony Joshua. You know, Anthony Joshua being that one fighter that Eddie Hearn has had from really the beginning, build him up to the star that he has become. And then according to Oscar De La Hoya, basically Anthony Joshua's career has been fumbled with by Eddie Hearn. I don't really get involved in talking about these type of beefs typically, but it's interesting to me that Oscar De La Hoya is pointing out the fact that, number one, Eddie Hearn's fighters that he promoted, especially in the last year or two, they've lost in competitions, some of them, where basically some of their fights they should have won. But that's not even what I'm harping on. I'm really harping on the thing that's more intriguing than that, is that Oscar De La Hoya has had trouble building fighters himself. Now, you know, I just conducted and published a video when I talked about Oscar De La Hoya criticizing the PBC and talking about how he has helped promote those PBC fighters. Now, remember, those fighters became world champions after they've fought on Golden Boy Promotions cards, most of them, right? But the thing is, if you really look into Oscar De La Hoya's history with his promotion company, I mean, quite frankly, he hasn't promoted more than one fighter himself, while he's equally criticizing Eddie Hearn only having that one major attraction in Anthony Joshua. I mean, let's be clear on, I told you this before, so we got to be clear on this, that Ryan Garcia's first major pay-per-view that he actually headlined was against Tank Davis. Before that, Ryan Garcia was not a pay-per-view attraction or a star on pay-per-view. And that was Oscar De La Hoya's, and still is Oscar De La Hoya's and Golden Boy's cash cow. I mean, if Oscar De La Hoya is using the format of Anthony Joshua's career to criticize Eddie Hearn, then we have to apply that same format to criticize Oscar De La Hoya in reference to Canelo Alvarez's career. Because let's face it, Oscar De La Hoya did promote. I think they did a good job. did a good job with Canelo. I mean, think about it. When Canelo was with Golden Boy, all or not most of the fights that, well, let me reframe that. Most or not all of Canelo Alvarez's fights were on the undercards of Floyd Mayweather's fights. Y'all remember that? You remember Canelo Alvarez fought Sugar Shane Mosley. Y'all remember that? He fought him on the undercard of a Floyd Mayweather fight. And of course, all of the fights that Canelo had on Mayweather's undercards was basically a tool, a method, and a strategy, which I do agree with, that allowed Canelo Alvarez to be built up and prepared to fight Floyd Mayweather. It's a great strategy. But if you really think about, after Canelo fought Mayweather and after Canelo stopped conducting business with Golden Boy Promotions, I mean, his career definitely took off without Oscar De La Hoya. So we can equally say the same thing Oscar's saying about Eddie Hearn. We can say those same things about Oscar De La Hoya. I mean, I asked y'all before, and I'll ask you again right now. Name an African-American fighter. Just one black fighter. You know we don't ask for much around here. Just one black fighter that Oscar De La Hoya has built up from the ground up and made into, number one, a world champion, and or number two, a pay-per-view attraction. You can leave that in the comment section below if you like. But the reason why I'm using the term black or African American is because we know that 80% of the performers and professional boxers in the sport of boxing are black or African American. And so if a promoter can't even take a fighter who represents the demographic that is heavily populated in this whole entire sport, then, you know, we have to start asking questions about that promoter. And I'm not talking about the questions of racism. I'm talking about the questions of connecting with fighters. And I do give Oscar De La Hoya credit for building up his fighters that represent his company, that represent his heritage. I respect that. But at some point, you have to be diverse. And if you look at Eddie Hearn, you have to give Eddie Hearn credit for diversity. I mean, he has all different kind of nationalities over at Matchroom Promotions, and he's been doing a good job, relatively so, with his lack of true understanding and knowledge of the American market. And I think he's getting better at learning more about the American market. But we can't just criticize Eddie Hearn, and you know who Eddie Hearn signed now. The great Jerron Boots Ennis. And we have to give Eddie credit for that. And he's doing a relatively good job with that. Where if you look at Oscar De La Hoya, he only has one fighter over there that we really talk about a lot. And that is Ryan Garcia, who's been headlining only 2 pay-per-view events. So Oscar need to work on what he got to deal with and what he has to make adjustments with, and help him build his stable, first of all, and help build his company. Because right now, outside of Ryan Garcia, and there's a few other guys over there, but they haven't had the opportunities yet to become pay-per-view attractions. There's nobody else that we really can look at and say, that fighter, and that fighter are going to be great. And not only going to be great, but they're doing great. Where if you look at Eddie Hearn in Matchroom, there's multiple fighters. I mean, multiple fighters that we can say that fighter is going to be great, or that fighter is good, or that fighter is a world champion, and that fighter is going to be a world champion. And you know what? All of these guys or ladies are going to be at a certain level in their career moving forward. And unfortunately, the trajectory of those fighters compared to De La Hoya's, and I'm saying unfortunately for Oscar and them, it's going to be by a landslide with the direction that Eddie Hearn is going in. So, you know, I'm not here to criticize De La Hoya, but, You know, like I always tell you, my mother always told me for 35 years, when you point your finger at somebody, there's always 3 fingers pointing at you. You know what? I'm doing way too much talking.